Hey everyone, it's Movie Lover 120 here, and I'm here with a brand new horror list. And kind of similar to the one I did yesterday, except that was for underrated horror sequels. This one is going to be for underrated horror movies. And none of these are going to be sequels. They're all going to be original films. So no sequels will be on this list. And this is actually a list done. My idea. This is not a, this horror list is actually not one inspired by Lore Hellhounds because this is actually one this one's actually just one I'm doing. Decided to do myself. But anyway, and once again, there will be no honorable mentions for this list because this list doesn't need to have any honorable mentions. So, with that being said, let's begin the list. At number 11, this is for a movie I have reviewed. That's, of course, Adam Green's Frozen, the 2010 movie, not the stupid Disney shit, like you're all probably thinking. This is from the same guy, director Adam Green, who directed Hatchet, and it's actually about three snowboarders who get trapped on this chairlift one night on this resort that will be shut down for the whole week. So they're basically now forced to think of several things. They have several options. They can either stay on the chairlift and freeze to death, or they can try to escape, risk getting eaten by packs of wolves, but still at least try to survive. Yeah. Unlike his film Hatchet, this takes a much more serious tone and emphasizes realism throughout. There's no heroics, no contrivances, just real chances of dying in a crucially horrible way. This movie even shows that Adam Green is clearly a horror lover. First and foremost, he puts the emphasis on the horrible nature of the scenario the three snowboarders are in. While much of what occurs is kept off screen, it makes it all the more powerful, and there's no denying the sickening feeling that accompanies one unforgettable event. So yeah, that would be number 11. Alright. Number 10 would have to be Mirrors, 2008. Yeah, I find this kind of an underrated flick. I think people don't give it much credit. It's actually directed by the same guy, Alexander Aja, the guy who directed the 2006 remake of The Hills Have Eyes. So there's going to be another Alexander Aja movie on this list, but this is definitely one of them. I think Alexander Aja's movies in general just very underrated films. This film is about this disgraced former cop who is played by Kiefer Sutherland, who takes a routine job guarding the charred ruins of a once famous department store. But the terrifying images he sees in the store's ornate mirrors will send him on a pulse-pounding mission to unravel the secrets of the building's past before they destroy his life. Yeah. I liked about this film. So, it's eerie, suspenseful, it's scary and well directed and acted. And there's this house in the movie that I've seen a production design that's very impressive. It's like another actor in the film, and people I think it's a very refreshing take on a horror film. And the villain's not some deformed demon or monster, it's a piece of glass. As I can understand why some people probably wouldn't like it. I mean, it was originally going to be a remake of a Japanese horror film, but then Alexander Aja thankfully changed the storyline, made it a little more original, so it's kind of more of his own idea and more of his own take on the film and more original take on the film, so it's not really a remake. I don't know why people call it a remake so much. But yeah. I think if this were made today, it would probably just be some stupid Blumhouse shit. That was all PG-13, felt toned down, felt too goofy and comedy every time. So yeah. But yeah, this is one of those possession horror films I recommend I'd recommend checking it out. One that's not from Blumhouse. And number 9 would have to be, okay, you find it in the pile. Ah, here it is. Bug. 2006 or 2007, whenever it was released. You can kind of call this movie a horror film, but yeah. But what is this film about? Well, this one's about a lonely waitress with a tragic past named Agnes who rooms into a run-down motel, living in fear of her abusive ex-husband. When she begins a romance with Peter, a drifter, she starts to feel hopeful again until the first bugs arrive. Basically, when viewers saw the film, they pretty much bashed it. The mainstream crowd were clearly expecting an obvious crowd pleaser focused on one genre, which I guess I can understand why maybe they didn't like the film for that reason, but what I liked about this movie, it actually goes much deeper than it appears to even be. Most people are expecting just a typical horror movie, but instead this was kind of like a psychological thriller, but it's still kind of a horror movie at times. There's no like heroes or villains in this film. It's meant to show how everyday people in an everyday world, with one woman just desperately trying to have someone who can love her, and finally find someone who can read her. But and she then sets aside the fact that he's this paranoid schizophrenic who believes that someone is out to get him. So yeah, I think it's kind of a good movie for what it is. Alright. Number 8 would have to be VHS 2012. I reviewed this movie last November. And I think it's one of the better found footage movies. Mostly the first segment, Amateur Night. And I kind of wish this didn't get a limited release. I kind of wish it got a theatrical release because it's one of the better found footage movies out there, but I might not talk about this one as much because I've already really reviewed it. So yeah. Alright, next one. Number 7 would have to be 30 Days of Night, 2007. Now this is a vampire movie. It's not that stupid Twilight shit with the sparkly vampires. No. This is one where the vampires actually kill people, look horrifying, and ones you can actually fear and actually take seriously. This is actually a scary film actually worth watching. Actually considers one of my favorite horror movies of all time too. I have seen quite a few zombie vampire movies, and this is probably one that does stand out to me because even though it uses a lot of gore, it's not what makes it scary. It's the tension. You don't know what will happen next, the atmosphere is creepy, and the movie just gets through to you. You can kind of feel the Alaskan cold. Most movies like this always end really badly, but this one almost does well, but the thing that's really freaky about this film is the vampires. I mean, definitely don't want one of these vampires. Don't want to counter any one of these vampires, so yeah. It's also a very good film that's also worth watch. Okay, number 6 would have to be The Green Inferno, an Eli Roth movie. Here's why. It's Roth's take on environmental activists. All the main characters are self-serious, latte drinking, save the rainforest university types who infiltrate a clear-cutting operating deep in the Amazon jungle and chain themselves in a logging machinery in order to protest corporate greed. A satellite link up with their iPhones. Cuts effectively deep for a film. However, their decision then goes awry and they're forced to go back. But on the way back, they end up being captured by this cannibalistic tribe. Now, personally, a lot of people seem to hate this movie, but personally, I kind of like it. I think it's one of the better modern horror movies out there. Especially with the grisly makeup effects. It's this big throwback to Eli Roth kind of made as like a throwback to Cannibal Holocaust. Which was kind of very nice and sort of thing, and definitely recommend if you're a fan of like cannibal horror films. So yeah. Number 5 would have to be... Alright. Yeah, I got it. Dead Silence. James Wan's next movie he did after Saw. And this film is about this curse named Mary Shaw, a ghost story that resides in the town of Ravensfair that's now being haunted by horrific deaths. When one local's wife is brutally murdered, he returns home to unravel the terrifying legend of Mary Shaw and the reason why, when you see her, you should never ever scream or you die. Yeah. What do I like about this movie? Many people just dismiss it as a formula cliched horror film. But as a very triggering story, there's just not enough horror films these days about menacing old ventriloquist ladies that are buried with their creepy dolls, come back for the dead to seek vengeance on the families that put her in the grave by tearing out their tongues. It's got a very heavy atmosphere, creepy music provided by Sauce Charlie Closer, the colors are washed out and the sets are surreal. I was also pleased the film didn't shy away from the gore. I mean, it's not too gratuitous, but it does enhance the horror. Ghost stories tend to be separate from the gore flicks, but I enjoyed seeing them combined in this film. Another aspect was that interesting was the silence mode that signaled the presence of evil. And it even has plenty of elements to provide scares. Aged film, folktales, singing children, antique furniture, voice recordings fading out, flickering lights, dead loved ones, beckoning from beyond the grave, photographs of dead families, cackling old women, wide-eyed dolls, billowing curtains, plenty of thunder and lightning, open caskets, den crawl spaces, and a pervading sense of evil throughout. Maybe the so-called critics don't dig it, but personally, if you're a fan of James Wan and Leigh work, I would still try to give this movie a chance because it's still worth it. I'm glad it's kind of gotten a bit better over time. I'm too, so yeah. Give it a watch when you get the chance if you haven't seen it yet. Number 4 would have to be, alright, Wolf Creek from 2005. And this one is about... This is where the suspense of the Blair Witch Project would meet the horror of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Think of it as like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Australian version. Inspired by Australia's backpacker killer who murdered 7 backpackers in the 90s, Wolf Creek won wide acclaim from critics, filmmakers, and audience members alike at the Sundance Film Festival. The unsuspecting hikers take off for a drive across Australia. When the trio returns from a 4-hour hike to Wolf Creek National Park, they find their car is dead. Help comes in the form of big back-slapping bushman Mick. Since Mick appears to be more Crocodile Dundee than Freddy Krueger, the trio trusts him, which proves to be a great mistake. Basically, what makes this film actually pretty frightening is how realistic and plausible the story is. Mick seems like a demon that could actually exist in the real world. He's not a super genius serial killer always toying with cops. He doesn't kill to fulfill some grandiose plan or message. He doesn't kill his victims in elaborate and unlikely scenarios of games. Rather, he's a pure sadist who just seems to enjoy watching pain, suffering, and death. It's that simple. It doesn't take much imagination to realize in the middle of the outback, it would be quite easy for a psycho like Mick to operate for a long time and never get caught. This film is basically brutally violent and unflinchingly realistic. It doesn't give the audience time to catch their breath or to feel any hope. It's not really... if you're not a fan of gore or like torture films, it's not really for everyone. It's bound to leave anybody feeling unsettled and feeling uneasy, only for real horror fans desire a scare that will stick with them long after the movie ends. Yeah. I didn't watch the sequel. I heard the sequel's pretty bad. So yeah. I would just only watch the first film. The first film's the only good one. If you do want to watch this film, and number 2 would have to be yet another Alexander Aja film, and this was the first movie he did, High Tension. Definitely one of the most very underrated horror movies of all time. Basically, this movie's about 2 girls named Murray and Alexia escape for a quiet weekend to Alexia's parents' farmhouse to prepare for their college exams. In the dead of night, A stranger knocks on the door, and with the first swing of his knife, the girl's idyllic weekend becomes an endless night of terror. Alright. Basically, High Tension is intended as this cheery throwback to those Halicon days circa 19 where you could see Driller, Killer, Maniac, and Nightmare back to back in a Center City grindhouse where the house lights never went up. Only one scene the place didn't reek of urine and sweat. And the poor teenage gesture and concession stand worker would huddle together in the lobby under a bare light bulb to avoid being knifed off by some crazed street person. This film is actually a French and somewhat arty and very well made. It's kind of definitely at odds with the subject matter of its homage. Definitely a straight-ahead slasher film throwback with no self-reflecting winking to the audience as your audience. And if that's your thing, then definitely watch this movie. This movie shows that it's no wonder that Wes Craven picked Alexander Aja to direct his Hills of Eyes remake. After this. Alright. This number 2 would have to be The Skeleton Key, 2005. This film basically revolves around this nurse who sees an ad for this home in New Orleans. She drives there. She has to take care of this paralyzed old guy. But then she just discovers that the house is a little more than it seems. Once she's given this skeleton key to access any door, yeah. The success with this type of movie sets up it probably has one of the best endings in a horror movie ever. I think it's a very good movie. It has a script that doesn't cheat anyone, it doesn't rely on silly gimmicks. That just should portend good tidings for its success in its original release, but definitely will become a classic of its kind. The heroine in distress manages to be smarter than the usual stereotype. She kind of wants to explore the surroundings and solve the problem. Although, the problem is she has no idea how bad the situation could be. Then Jenna Rollins provides her character with nuance is rarely seen in this type of film. She's a strange character and hooks up the audience from the very beginning. There's no really an archetype for what Rollins brings to life. I might find the previous statement questionable, but if you look closely at the development of a character, it's almost pretty original. It's very mysterious, and this is one of those rare films where Kate Hudson actually does a pretty good performance. This time goes beyond the pretty actress to an accomplished performer who matches up to Roland's intensity. She navigates the film with an ease rarely seen in today's roster of plastic prepackaged persuadal celebrities. It's refreshing to see an actress make you care for the character that has so often been portrayed as an offensive stereotype. There's no gratitude screaming scenes here. It's kind of like The Others, a movie with substance and intelligence. So yeah. And it is a PG-13 horror film, but it's a PG-13 horror film that does not suck. Like I said with Mirrors, if this and Dead Silence were made today, they both would also probably just be a bunch of Blumhouse shit. So yeah. Even though I hate PG-13 horror films, I'd still try to give this movie a watch because it's actually not really PG-13 like, it's actually pretty violent for a PG-13 movie. Just saying. Alright, here we go. Now, on to the number 1. What I feel like is the most underrated horror movie in history. One that should get more attention than it gets. That number 1 underrated horror movie of all time is 1988's Pumpkinhead. Yeah. Pumpkinhead to me is the most underrated horror movie in history. And we're going to get to why. So, Pumpkinhead focuses on this group of teens who accidentally kill a young boy named Billy Harley. His father Ed is devastated, and the only thing he now wants is revenge. He goes to this creepy old woman who is said to be a witch and conjures a demonic creature, alien-like creature known as Pumpkinhead, and unleashes him on the teens. But then he starts to realize what he'd done, and he sets out to stop the very demon he unleashed. Once he starts to realize how really murderous and untrustworthy the demon is. So yeah. Why I find this movie so underrated, because it's got a compelling story of a father's love and a powerful group of vengeful desires. It's pretty well acted, has amazing creature effects, and takes the road less traveled by most horror films. It's got no easy ways out. Plot prefers to turn slowly into a gnarled tale of battling with an inner demon. The lighting in the fog and the mere visual presence of the witch, Haggis, with her wispy hairs in the firelight, are generally creepy, and I think Lance Henriksen gives one of his best performances in the film. Definitely give it a look if you haven't yet. Yeah, performances in this film. And it probably has one of the few best kills in a horror movie where that one teenage girl, Maggie, is captured by Pumpkinhead and straight up has a crop. And before Pumpkinhead drops her to doom, he grabs his sharpest finger, carves a cross in her head because she's religious, and he drops her to her doom. Yeah. Probably one of the best kills in horror history. I actually would give this film a watch too. I think kind of wish it got a little more appreciation. I mean, it did get like 3 shitty direct-to-DVD sequels, which I'd ignore if I were you. Only watch the first one. Yeah. And there you go. That's my number 1 most underrated horror movie. And that's my list of the most underrated horror movies in history. I want to know what you think is the most underrated horror movie but guys, don't say sequels. Say horror films that are not sequels you find underrated. And until then, that'll be the first video. Thank you all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, then don't forget to like and subscribe to Movie Lover 120.